Whether you're buying a new car or used one, it's a big investment, which is why you should choose Pennzoil Platinum. It helps extend the life of your engine and protect it up to 15 years or 500,000 miles, whichever comes first, guaranteed. That's because Pennzoil's base oil is made from natural gas and 99.5% free from engine clogging impurities. The proof is in the Pennzoil. Enrollment required. Keep your receipts. Other conditions apply. See pennzoil.com/warranty for full details. Find it at Firestone Complete Auto Care.
This is ContactTalkRadio.com. Consciousness in action. And you are taking action into your consciousness by tuning into Contact Talk Radio.
And on TuneIn.com, Hing.fm, and UpSnap Mobile.
Contact Talk Radio.
Welcome to Life Mastery with Todd Allen, the talk radio show that dives into the science of higher consciousness. Join Todd and his guests weekly at 10 a.m. Pacific Time and learn how to live a peaceful life with intentional mastery. Enjoy a survey of inspiring topics such as abundance, intention, health, manifestation, love, and transformation. It's all right here. Leading authors, speakers, coaches, entrepreneurs with stories and messages to support your well-being, let alone your most evocative dreams.
Hey, it's another groovy day, and there's two reasons for that. The first one is that when I woke up this morning, I already made the decision it was going to be a groovy day, so that started that out. And it's Life Mastery Radio Day. Yay! My most favorite day of the week. I know it's Jackie's favorite day too, because her and I get to hang out with some really cool people. Welcome to Life Master Radio, the talk show that brings you great thoughts and ideas for you to use on your very own life mastery journey. As always, I like to open the show up and get myself centered and situated and ready for some great content that they're tools, really. Jackie and I present tools every week that you can take and put in your life mastery toolkit and pull them out whenever you need them. So I like to get myself ready for that. And let's just take a minute, get clear and ready for that great content. And I want you to think about what it is that you connect to. What is it that you get power from? Could be the tree, the dude, God, Allah, the doorknob that leads to your bedroom, whatever it is. Think about that, which brings you peace and clarity. Let's take in a deep breath and just think about that gives you power, and let that breath out with a big ah, and just let your essence flow up through your heart center, out of your throat chakra, out of your speaker box, and out into the universe. Ah. Let's do that one more time. And this time, think about your dreams, visions, and goals. What is it that you aspire to be, do? What do you want to bring into your world? What are you working on? You should be working on that book that's in you. That's what you should be working on. But think about that. Take in a deep breath. Again, let that breath out with a big ah. Let your essence flow. Let those dreams, visions, and goals flow out of your speaker box, out into the universe. And for sure, allow the universe the opportunity to make those come true for you. It will happen. It does happen. Right, Jackie? Hi, Jackie.
Yes, it does happen.
How are you today, my friend?
I'm very well. Thank you.
Very well.
Yes.
She's very well. Not groovy, not awesome.
I'm very well. I thought of a story as you were talking about bringing these hopes and dreams up through our throat chakra. And can I tell you something I learned the other day? It's a very interesting experience. So I've been contemplating investing in something, not really an investment, but in getting involved with something, a program that I think will help my business and help me serve the kids I serve better, right? And so I've been contemplating this. And as I was coming in my studio a couple of days ago, there was a blue jay, or actually in this area in Washington, we call him a Steller's jay, but they're from the same family. He was sitting in this tree outside the door of my studio. And he was looking at me, and he wasn't singing. He was going, grumbling kind of thing. And
That's
I thought,
a good sign.
what's that about? So I stood there and looked at him. I was really close. He was just up in the branch just above me, and he was looking at me, and I was looking at him, and he was doing this. So I came in and thought, I got to look up blue jay spirit animal and see what comes up for me, right? So I did, and I found this site that immediately said, blue jays or stellar jays are for the entrepreneur in you. And because they are the color of the throat chakra, blue, they are about communicating and putting your voice out there into the world. And because they fend off predators much larger than themselves, they have this innate ability to be powerful when they need to be. And that this little bird was telling me that it's okay, that the decision I make, that I was trying to make, is a good one, and that I need to just do it. And it was such an answer. It was really cool. And so now I've seen that same Stellar's jay outside my window a couple of times. Like, he keeps showing up and reminding me, remember, you got to do that thing.
Well, no, that's very cool, because I have a few of them around, and I never realized that was true. But what you just described gave me goosebumps. Totally,
Yeah,
because
cool.
that's the way it works. I don't know. Animals seem to pick up on when we ponder on things. I mean, I've had that experience numerous occasions. Some of them that come to mind were thinking and contemplating something and looking out my window, and there's a deer right there. Just, hi, how you doing? I thought I'd just peek in on you. Or raccoons would come, or it's just, yeah. That's so cool that you described that, because that is so very true, and it's been my experience too. So right on.
Neat.
Hey, send me that website.
Yeah, I'll do that. It was a shaman site or something like that. But I'll
very cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
And things are going well with the school. You just started up some classes. You got kids. You're teaching, and goodness, fill us in a little bit.
Yesterday, I actually started a new class, an 8-week course with a group of kids that are in grades 4 and 5. And it was the first time teaching a class where none of my students were in the state of Washington.
Wow.
They're all outside the state of Washington. So I had California and Illinois and Texas. And so that was pretty cool. That was a big milestone, because, we started locally in my public speaking studio here. And then when the pandemic hit, of course, we had to pivot everything virtually. And now, because we are virtual, our outreach is so much bigger. And so it was really exciting yesterday. What a great milestone that all of these kids were from outside of my local area. It was actually kind of exciting. So.
You radiate this really cool smile, and look at that. Oh man, I need a screenshot. Where's print screen? That is so cool.
Yeah. So we're making progress. We're getting our message out there, and we're helping the kids have their own message too.
You go, girl. Don't stop. I'm right behind you. I don't want to step on you. Just kidding.
It's fun. How are things going with you? How's business and such?
It's Life Mastery Radio Day. Don't you know that?
Yeah, but you do more than radio, my friend. You are about to reach a huge milestone at Toastmasters International, right? You're about to become a second distinguished Toastmaster.
Number 2, one with Legacy and one with Pathways. That's our education system. That's kind of cool. It's kind of interesting that we both got it at relatively the same time. So that's different. Yeah. It took a couple years. And all is good. Live in the woods, live with creatures and on a lake, and life is all groovy. And you're right. I do a lot of things. I'm trying to think of all those things. Are you ready for the show? I want to remind our listeners that today's show page is at www.lifemasteryradio.com or .net, whichever one you prefer, and any links that we talk about will be posted right there on today's show page with our guests. While you're there, check out Jackie's blog. Jackie writes a blog about every show, and it's amazing what she can pick up and has insight into. It's really cool. While you're on the site, sign up for the newsletter. Then you will get links, who's been on the show, who's coming on the show, and Jackie's blog. It's pretty cool. You can sign up for that right on our website. Both Jackie's book and my book are right there. Follow the link. Go to Amazon. wherever. I don't know that we have our books in local stores. That's a curious question. We might have to look into that, Jackie. And that is it. Are you ready for our guest? I think I'm ready for our guest.
Yeah, we've got a very interesting subject to talk about today.
Grief. We're talking about grief. Our guest today is Claire B. Willis, and you can see her. She's right there in the corner on our screen, and she is a clinical social worker and has practiced in the fields of oncology and bereavement for more than 2 decades. She has worked in hospice care for many years, both as a volunteer and a social worker. As a lay Buddhist chaplain ordained by Joan Halifax, she has focused on contemplative practices for end-of-life care. For the past 5 years, Claire has been a student of Koshin Paley Ellison, a founding teacher at the New York Zen Center for Contemplative Care. She is the author of a book, Lasting Words, a guide to finding meaning toward the close of life. She leads a bereavement, end-of-life support, and therapeutic writing groups, and maintains a private practice in Brookline, Massachusetts. Her recent book that she co-authored with Marnie Crawford Samuelson is Opening to Grief, Finding Your Way from Loss to Peace. Claire, welcome to the show today, my friend. How are you?
Thank you for having me. You know, when you were telling that bluebird story, that blue jay story, when you were describing the sounds he made, like I was thinking, I said to myself, he's saying to you, get to that project, get to that project. That's exactly what I thought. So when you said he was the spirit guide for being entrepreneurship, whatever.
Yeah.
I thought, yeah, that's perfect. It's funny. That's just what I was thinking he was saying to you. And I thought, oh, you have to decipher that.
Well, I had to go look it up.
That's okay.
But also it's interesting because his blue coloring also matches the throat chakra color, which is I'm an entrepreneur for communication and teaching kids public speaking skills. So it all made sense.
Oh, that's so
I don't know why I'd never figured it out before, but anyway, I do now.
That's so interesting. Yeah. So thanks for having me.
You're welcome.
What's even cooler about that, Claire, is that Jackie, I mean, in the last couple of years, her whole world has just opened up. And for her to think about being open to something like that, it just blows me away. I've watched so much growth in the last couple of years.
I know 2 years ago, Todd, I wouldn't have gone, I wonder what that spirit animal might be.
Exactly. My point exactly. Claire, welcome to the show. We're talking about grief, and you know, I read through your book, and one of the things that really jumped out, there's a bunch of things that really jumped out to me, but was your statement, I was always under the impression there was these 5 steps that you had to go through, right? And I can tell you, when my dad passed away 20 years ago this August, and it was devastating. It was probably the most devastating thing I've ever gone through in my entire life. But I can remember, Claire, thinking, okay, now I got to go through this step, and then pretty soon it's this step. And then I was thinking, hey, I haven't done this yet. Am I weird? What's the deal? Am I not doing this right? And I think in your book, I was enlightened to the fact that not everybody's the same. And you know, this was a theory thrown out there that has caught in mainstream. Maybe enlighten us a little bit about that.
You know, it was a wonderful theory, and it was Elizabeth Kubler-Ross basically came up with this theory many years ago, and it was intended to describe the stages people go through who are dying.
Oh.
And it's been applied to people who are grieving, which is not to say that those stages don't happen, but they don't happen linearly. So there is anger and grief, there is denial, there is shock, there is bargaining, there is acceptance, but it's not sequential. And I think one of the reasons I wrote the book is that I got so tired in my bereavement group of repeating to people, the way you're grieving is normal. And I think in our culture, we tend to think of grief as having a very particular face. We think of it as sadness, sorrow, despair, depression, hopelessness. But grief is anger, it's rage, it's irritability, it's impatience, it's regret, it's gratitude, it's relief. It has as many expressions as there are people who are grieving. And one of the things that happens in families a lot is that someone will say, I'm the only one grieving in the family. My sister's just gone on with her life. And I think we don't recognize grief in the various forms it can come. And so we tend to get judgmental. And also, I think with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross is where people would criticize themselves for not grieving right because they hadn't gone through all those stages. And while those descriptions of the stages often accompany our grief journey, they may not necessarily. You may not have a moment of denial, you know? So we have to be careful with these models not to oppress ourselves or silence ourselves or shame ourselves. And that's a big one, because when we shame ourselves, we're adding suffering to what's already difficult.
Yeah.
Why does it get so competitive sometimes that, like you say, if my sister, she's just going out and partying with all her friends and I'm the only one sitting over here missing dad or whatever, why does it become so competitive that way?
I think, I don't know that I would call it competitive, Jackie, but I think what happens is that people who are grieving want to know they're not grieving alone. They want to share their grief with other family members. And so when it has an entirely different face, it's hard to feel that connection unless you understand, oh, the anger and irritability my sister's showing is actually her sorrow that she can't express. It's much easier to be angry and irritable and rageful because there's a false sense of strength that you project. It takes a lot of strength to feel the vulnerability and the tenderness and the sorrow and the hopelessness that comes with that expression of grief. And not everybody can do it. And, you know, if you think about our last president, one of the things that I used to think to myself, I think he's a man who carried more rage than anybody I've ever met in my life. And I used to say to myself, what happened to him as a child that he is so hardened? You know, because he couldn't, you never saw tenderness, you never saw vulnerability. All you saw was a hard front. And it takes strength to feel vulnerability and allow it yourself to be sorrowful and sad.
Well, that's probably pretty typical of a huge part of the male population. I mean, for me growing up, I was taught, you know, suck it up and big boys don't cry. And if I got hurt, shake it off, you'll be fine.
That's right. Those are the messages. They're so
and
true.
I think it wasn't until I was in my early 40s when I discovered that I had a feminine side and how much power and a huge opening up that I experienced. But I think a lot of guys in our society today just never experienced that or even know what it's like to be like that.
Well, they didn't have permission to experience it. You know, it was such a part of the socialization process to suck it up, as you say, or get on with it, brush off, you know, get up and brush off the dirt. That's how we've socialized a lot of men, to their detriment.
Yeah, totally. I always say, though, we don't get to know how we don't want to be until we get there. And I think that there's a huge awakening coming, and it's been kind of slow, and there are still some remnants of that, but I think it's coming. Yeah. And I think you talked about that in your book, about how you see more women than you do men.
Yeah, I do. The groups have a disproportionate number of women in them, for sure, support groups.
Do you find too, Claire, that sometimes grief is such a deeply felt, overwhelming feeling that many times if we feel like we give into that, it's actually going to overtake us and maybe we could never find our way out? Is that, you ever talk to people that's a realistic fear?
Oh, yes. So I've heard people say repeatedly, if I start to cry, I'm never going to stop. And in fact, you know, it's so funny. I just came out of another group I run for people with cancer this morning. And one of the questions that someone raised was, how can I allow myself to feel my sorrow and the sorrow of the world without imploding in it? And I think one of the things that happens with our psyche is that our psyche, our grief comes in waves. It comes and goes, it comes and goes. And that is to protect ourselves. We can't take in death and loss all at once. So Stephen Levine, who wrote some wonderful books with his wife, Andrea, talks about how death is like looking at the sun. We look, we turn away, we look, we turn away. Because if we stare at it, we'll burn our eyes. And there's a phenomenon in the grief literature called STUG, which is a sudden temporary upsurge of grief. So let's say you've lost someone you love, and I hear this in my groups a lot. You're walking down the aisle of the supermarket, and all of a sudden you see a can of beans, and you remember that your partner loved beans, and you burst out crying because you've all of a sudden had this triggering memory. This is a very common phenomenon. And people will come to my groups and they'll say, I really lost it. I thought I was doing so well, but I lost it today. And I think I'm going backwards in my grief. And I say, you're not going backwards. You had a sudden temporary upsurge of grief. This is normal. All you have to do is ride it out and it'll be gone in 24 hours, because we can't sustain the full impact of the catastrophe of the loss. So it has to titrate and come in waves.
And it never really goes away, right?
It never goes away. It shouldn't go away. Our grief shouldn't go away, because, I'm going to take this moment to read this quote that I wish was in my book by Jamie Anderson. And she writes, grief, I have learned, is really just love. All that unspent love gathers up in the corners of your eyes, the lump in your throat, and in that hollow part of your chest. Grief is just love with no place to go. And I love that, because if you love someone or something, you should never stop grieving, but your grief changes in intensity, duration, and frequency. So when you first lose something you love, there's a searing pain, and all your whole life is just grief in front of your eyes. You can't see anything else. And then slowly different things come into your life, different resources, and it moves from being a searing pain to a dull ache. And I like the analogy of, it's like a broken bone. When it first happens, it kills. It's so painful. Then you have surgery, you have it set, you wear a cast, you have PT, and you walk again. But on rainy days, the ache returns to the bone. And so I think of grief like that. It's a progression, but it doesn't go away, and it shouldn't go away if it's an expression of your love. You don't want
to. How's your foot feeling?
Yeah. I was just like that. Claire was describing the last 2 years of my life. Broken ankle, surgery, then ankle injured again, another surgery. Yeah.
Oh, really?
So, yeah.
I didn't know that.
So, but I've never likened that to grief, and that makes a lot of sense.
Doesn't that make sense? I love that analogy.
It does. And I know that, when my father passed away, it was very sudden, and there was a lot of regret, because it was 2 days after Father's Day, and I hadn't gone to see him on Father's Day, but he didn't answer the door. He wasn't home, which was unusual because my dad was always home. And so the thought was, well, I'll come back again in a little while. And I got busy with my 2 kids and I never made it back, and I didn't get to see him on that Father's Day. And then 2 days later, he passed away of a heart attack. And and it was really difficult, only because our relationship was really just starting to blossom at that time. And for years, he and my mom had been divorced, and there was always that competition, who's the better parent kind of thing. And my mom was always trying to win that argument. And so I didn't know my dad very well until I got married and moved close to him, and then saw him often. And so it was during a time when I was just starting to feel like I have a relationship now with my dad that's all mine. It's not because of my mom or my brothers or anything. It was mine.
Right.
And then he was gone so suddenly. And for the first week after that, there's so many plans to make. You've got to plan a funeral. You've got to plan the program for that. You've got to buy the casket. You've got to buy the plot. You've got to do all that stuff. And I just remember thinking, oh, there's so much to do. There's so much to do. And I haven't taken a moment to just think about what I've lost
Process
here.
It, right.
And I wonder if that's actually healthy. I wonder if if that's kind of part of our woven into our American lifestyle to some degree, depending upon what religion you belong to, or if you belong to religion at all. But there seems to be that process of planning the funeral. And I wonder if that's good in your opinion, because it takes that initial
Shock.
heartbreak away and turns that energy towards something else. But then there's still got to be that time when all of that settles down and the family who's visiting leaves and you're sitting there alone, now starting to really delve into your feelings. Is that good, or is that not?
Well, what I would say is typically what happens, people often say, and this is one of the myths about grief. Well, people will often say the first year is the worst. Actually, for some people, the first year isn't the worst because they are so tied up with the material aspects of closing someone's life. The second year is when oftentimes the intensity of the feelings of the loss come in, when we don't have the structure to create our life. So it's not about good or bad. We all have to choose at any given moment when we're grieving, whether we're going to cope or deal. So when someone gets a diagnosis of cancer, usually what happens is that they have to find a doctor, they have to find a hospital, they have to figure out a protocol, and they go through a coping period, just like when someone dies, because something is dying in them too. And I don't mean literally, but the idea of being healthy for starters, and life as they knew it. And then after that stuff is settled, after the material aspects of the care or the life is settled, you have time to start to have the feelings. So at any given moment, we all have to either cope or deal. And we can't deal when we're coping, and we can't cope when we're dealing. So it's a conscious choice you have to make. So it's not good or bad. You have to close a life if you're one of the executors or one of the close relatives, you know. And so it's functional, actually. But hopefully at some point you make time to come back to deal with the emotional parts of what you've lost, of who you've lost.
Well, it seemed like for me, that was when that anger kind of came in. It was like, why did you do this? Why didn't you answer the door that day? You know, that kind of thing. And you start kind of feeling
Playing
anger a little bit. Yeah.
Ruminating, it's called.
Right.
Ruminating.
Right.
There's a
Right.
Right? I love
Yeah.
that word, just like it sounds. Yeah.
Well, in your
You
book,
know,
you give some.
Jackie, can I just say one other thing about that? Often what happens, and I think this is important, is that the last day or two or the last minutes of someone's life take on a huge significance when we've been with them and loved them our whole life. And it gets overloaded. And sometimes the last word someone will have said is, you know, you're really making me angry right now. Who knows? But if it wasn't the loving departure that we all wish for, it's very easy for us to judge ourselves and think if woulda, coulda, shoulda. And I think those last moments of someone's life get way overweighted. And what was good all before that can get too easily forgotten. So I just want to say that to your listeners, because a lot of people don't have the closing with their loved one that they would wish.
I think that's probably most of the time, right?
I agree. Yeah.
Because we don't want to ever say goodbye.
Right.
If you know, if it's an illness and it's long term and we know that eventually it's going to happen, that doesn't mean that it's easier to accept than a sudden accident where they're just gone in a minute. I don't know that either way is harder than the other. I don't think either way is easier than the other. I think it's just different.
They're just
different.
Well, there's a change, right, Claire? It's a lot of, and I found that profound in your book too, is a lot of it is about, and I've never really thought this through, but a lot of it is about now the change in your life. It will never be the same. You can't get it back.
That's right.
The loss of that person, the changes that your life now. I mean, it just blew me away thinking about that.
Yeah.
Claire, did you have an experience of loss that prompted you to write this book, or is it just simply because of the patients that clients that you had?
I think it's clients, but I think I grew up in a family in which grief wasn't tolerated. And the walls and the furniture in my home were gray with ungrieved grief. And my parents each had traumatic suicides in their immediate family, and they weren't spoken. And as a kiddo, I could feel it. And there's a certain life force and vitality that my siblings don't have. And I think in part it's because they haven't really dealt with the grief, the loss.
Yeah.
And is
So
that
that-
why you decided to help other
Yeah,
people
I
with
knew,
that?
I always said, I don't want this life. You know, I knew I wanted a different life. And so anyway, and I also have always been told, but the characterization I have in my family of origin is, oh, Claire's the probe. She's always asking questions and they're just too personal. And I finally found work that welcomes who I am. And I like talking about things that are significant. And I like working with people at the end of their life a lot. It's a very joyful experience because those people know something about life and the tenuousness of it that those of us who aren't close to that can't grasp. It's quite a beautiful process.
Well, I would have to imagine you bring peace and understanding at a closing time. Did I get that right? I mean, for people.
Well, what I do is I try to help people close their life in a way that they feel complete and that something will be of their life and who they were will be left behind.
Right. Legacy.
Yeah, I do a lot of legacy work. That's not what this book is about, but I do a lot of legacy work. In fact, I'm doing a workshop this afternoon on legacy. Yeah.
Wow.
So
well, what I really enjoyed about your book is that you don't just talk about the emotions that you feel during the loss of a loved one, but you give some really good suggestions of actions we can take, things we can do to, I don't know, in some way honor that person or at least work through what our life has opportunity for us now, with even despite the loss. So can you tell us some of the things in your book that you suggest our audience can do when they're in the middle?
Well, one of them, I just want to jump in really quick because this was one of them was writing, right, Claire? I mean, I watched a podcast you did and you said something about writing, oh my gosh, it was right on the tip of my tongue and I swallowed it.
Don't ask me what I said.
But writing helped us through that process, and it was the spiritual experience of writing that helped us through the grieving process. Oh my gosh, I should have wrote it down.
I don't know what I said because that was many months ago.
I say many things. I don't know what I said.
At my age, things go in and out, but I can talk a little bit about the benefits of writing.
Maybe it'll
Let me
pop
just
up.
say this, that in the book are 7 or 8 chapters about how to help you hold grief, how to help you be with it. So, because if we can be with it, grief will change us. It'll increase our capacity to be with more parts of ourselves, and it'll increase our capacity to be with others who are grieving. And I think one of the lonely things that's really lonely about grief is that few people have friends who can really hold and be with them in their grieving. And if we haven't navigated our own grief, we're not going to be able to be with somebody else who's grieving. It'll be too painful. And I hear this a lot. So each chapter, it offers the reader a resource for being with their grief so that they can let it carve a place in their heart, keep the love going. So the chapter Todd's talking about is basically called Writing as a Refuge. And there's a lot of emerging research about the benefits of writing. And one of them is done by a man named James Pennebaker, who's a psychologist. And he basically says that if we can write 3 to 4 times a week about things that bother us, we actually will reduce our anxiety, reduce our depression. And
Ding, 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 ding. You got it. That was it.
Oh, okay. And increase our immune system functioning. So that's pretty powerful research. The other thing I hear a lot in my book, in my groups, is people will say, I don't ever want to forget the memories that we had. I don't want to forget this. And I say to them, you will forget. So start to write. And I suggest people take time each day and just write the stem, I remember, and see what comes. And when they finish with that memory, the next, I remember. And just keep writing the stem, I remember, because you will recreate the life you had together in writing, and you will not forget it. And it'll be there to pass on to your children too, which is another important aspect of this. The other thing I have people do, and they actually often do it on their own, is they write letters to the person they've loved and lost. So sometimes before bed, someone will say, here's what I wish I could have told you today that happened. And they write it, and they have a journal of letters to their loved one. And these can be beautiful memories for our children if this has been the loss of a father or something like that. So there's a lot of ways to use writing to stay in touch with your loved one, to stay in touch with memories, and to strengthen yourself in carrying your grief.
Would you also include too, Claire, that writing the memories you have about the person that's lost is also going to leave a legacy to family members who maybe didn't know that person? Like, for instance, when my father passed away, my children were just 2 and 4 years old. So they don't have any memory of him. So if I were to take time to just write, this is what I remember about my dad, this, then they get to at least know a little bit more about.
Yeah, this is who your grandfather was. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that seemed like another important way to write. And I know that when I was healing from childhood abuse, that was what my counselor required of me, was to write down the feelings that I was having on any given day or triggered by any different thing. And grief is really just healing.
That's
really,
right.
it's just really healing from a loss of something. So why wouldn't the same principle apply? I could see how powerful that is. And of course, I was told at that point we weren't into computers, but writing longhand, there's a great relationship from what's in your heart and your head, putting it out on your hand, holding a utensil, a pen, rather than typing on a keyboard. It's just not the same for me. I don't know if that's...
It's not the same, period. I mean, there's a lot of research that documents that. One of the things about writing is that what you want to do is find your unencumbered voice, where you write whatever is true for you, because most of us have a voice that we censor when we're talking to people. So when I'm talking to you, for instance, and I see your head go like this, I'm unconsciously modifying what I'm saying. Or if you look like perplexed, I'm going to correct what I'm saying in some way. But when you're writing, nothing stands between you and the page. And any feelings we inhibit stand to suppress our immune system. So writing is really important for our health, as well as other ways it may benefit other loved ones in terms of creating memories and that kind of thing.
That's fascinating. That research that you cited, it's just, I mean, our immune system, our health and well-being. No wonder we were given fingers, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
and also,
let me just say one other thing about this, which is, I think, to your point here too, Jackie and Todd, is that if you're taking notes during a seminar, let's say you're listening to a lecture and you're taking notes on the computer, you're probably writing down exactly what they're saying. You can do it. When you're handwriting, there's a different mental process that goes in, and you're integrating it more deeply than when you just are reporting or recording on the computer what's being said. So you're onto something, Jackie, about the handwriting here.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's been around. So what's another one? I think another one that you talk about, Claire, is art.
Yeah.
I talk about art. I talk about, I think I want to start with the first one, if you don't mind, because I think that we put a lot of attention on the first chapter, which is called Beginning with Kindness. And we started with kindness because, as I said earlier, people have so many judgments about how grief should look. And we really want to invite people to be with their grief in whatever way it came to them. And so kindness is really the most important thing. We close each chapter with a little meditation, and they're all the same phrases. It's called meta meditation or loving kindness meditation. Some people call it tender friend, and I love that phrase for it too. But for instance, the closing meditation in the first chapter is, may I start right here. May I offer myself kindness and compassion. May I accept myself as I am. And so I see so much suffering generated by people thinking that it should have a different look to it. But kindness is really where to start, taking your grief as it comes to you and just being with it and allowing it to move through you.
Yeah. No, recently, Claire, I had a very dear uncle of mine passed away. He got COVID, but then it was the lung issue that actually took his life. He was getting better, and then all of a sudden he wasn't. But his wife, my Aunt Rita, she was also sick with COVID, and she couldn't go to the hospital to see him or anything like that, and so was not with him when he passed. And so we all worried about her a lot. How is she going to be able to take this? I mean, they were married 60 years, something like that, a long time. And yet she has said, you know what, I actually feel better now more than I ever have. And it's not, a lot of people might in judgment go, oh, well, she must not have ever really loved Uncle Bob, or whatever. But I think what she means is that finally there's this relief for her. I'm not sure where it's coming from, but I accept that she says that. I accept that for her, life now seems a little bit easier or less, hard. And there's lots of different reasons that could be so, but I'm not willing to make any judgment about, well, that's right or wrong. She shouldn't be feeling that way, right? And so I think that's what you're saying, is that we need to just accept even some of the words that people say that describes their own grief can seem like unfeeling to us, when in reality it's just the way that they're feeling it. It's the way that they're perceiving it.
Well, and we don't know anything about the context of their relationship either. We don't know what she endured. A lot of people, there's a lot of private pain around. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of privacy of pain in our culture. And it's one of the reasons I love group work, because in my groups, people will say, oh, I wouldn't say this anywhere else, but I'm sleeping with my husband's shirts on because I miss his scent. Mm-hmm. Or someone said to me recently, Claire, you're the only person I would tell, but since my dog, her 14-year-old companion, died, I sleep with his favorite toy. She said, now, why are these stories private? That's ridiculous. These stories should be in the culture. They should be spoken. We should understand this. And I think one of the things that has happened with COVID, which is really important, is that grief is finally coming into mainstream media. And I don't know whether you saw the article yesterday in the New York Times about grief. It was wonderful. NPR, The Atlantic, it's coming finally. And so we're beginning to talk about some of the nuances of grief. That and certainly with COVID, David Brooks' article, where he asked readers a year ago to write and say how they were doing during this time, if this was the beginning of the pandemic, he got 5,000 replies in 3 days. Yeah. And what happened, what he said was that the final words of his article were beautiful. He said, there's a river of woe, a river of grief that's flowing through our culture. And I love the idea of a river because water seeps everywhere. Yeah. And we've just been through, we are still in the midst of a grief pandemic. We had a pandemic of a lethal virus, but we have a pandemic of grief, and we need to be naming it and saying, I did a workshop last week at a church, and I had everybody in the Zoom conversation name some of the griefs they'd lost. And we had everything from the murder of a child to retirement, to missing the hugs of my grandchildren, to loss of economics. I mean, you had big griefs and the smaller griefs, but each one was fully important to that person. And I had to keep saying, this is a no compare zone. When it's your grief, it fills you up, whether it's a broken shoelace or the loss of a dog or the loss of a parent, it fills you up. And we have to attend to it and not disenfranchise our own grief.
So do your methods of being kind and using writing and art, do they work for all those different kinds of grief as well?
I would hope that there's something in the book for everybody, that not every chapter is for everybody. I think one of the more, I think writing is not universal, but I think restoring in nature is universal. I think the natural world offers everybody healing. It asks nothing of us. You go outside and your eyes are in a receptive mode. We just take in what's happening. And most of us are sitting at a computer most of the day, focused and concentrating. And that's why being in the natural world is so important, because the body and the mind and the eyes rest. And we also see in the natural world the cycles of life, death, and rebirth.
Mhm.
And it mirrors, it gives us hope for whatever we're feeling.
Right.
There's can I read a poem from the book?
Sure. Go for it.
Please.
I want to read The Peace of Wild Things by Wendell Berry, because I love this poem. It's very beautiful. When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water, and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time, I rest in the grace of the world and am free. That's so beautiful. But I think during COVID, when people were in lockdown, people really understood something about the healing, restoring nature of the natural world.
Right. Well, that could have been some things that we were grieving, right? It's not being able to get out in nature.
Loss. I think, your book has perfect timing. I don't know. I don't know that you planned it that way, but it was released.
Supposed to come out last month. And then when COVID hit, the publisher contacted us and said, how quickly can you do this?
Wow. And your book, like you described, what a perfect gift for somebody that is going through loss, right? Because you can grab your book and just flip open to a page and maybe get some insight or some understanding of what is going on.
You know, one of the things that the endorsers wrote about the book, and over, people described it as a companion. And that was like the supreme compliment Marnie and I could get, because we wanted people to feel less alone when they read the book. We wanted them to feel, oh, other people have walked this walk. I am not by myself, because grief can feel so lonely, especially if you don't have a grief friend or somebody with whom you can really tell and retell the story of the loss you've endured.
Well, and what we talked about earlier too is the thought that, oh, I'm all by myself. I'm the only one that's experiencing this. I'm the only one that is having these thoughts and ideas, and I just got to keep it to myself. I'm special.
That's right. And I am in my bereavement groups. You know, I have people apologize in my bereavement groups for crying. People will start crying. They'll say, "Oh, I'm so sorry." I say, if you can't cry in here, where can you cry?
Right.
But that tells you how little tolerance the culture has for grief.
Well, what happens when, you know, all those firsts come around? The year that marks the anniversary of the loss of someone, or it could even be the loss of a job or something like that related to COVID. So what happens when all those firsts come around again? The first birthday or the first anniversary, the first holiday? What kind of advice do you give people to help them to get through that second wave, perhaps, of the grieving process?
Anticipate and plan for it. That's the biggest thing, so you don't get broadsided. Gather friends around, do something, you know, create a ritual if you need to, plant a tree, plant flowers, go to the gravesite, but plan for it and think closely about what you're going to need. And most people, what I find, need a little bit of solitude on that day and a little bit of companionship. And often people will say the anticipation of it was worse than the day itself. And I think that's because they've planned for it.
Yeah.
You know?
That's good advice. Now, how do you, some of the questions you have in your book, near the end of your book, you have just some perhaps frequently asked questions, maybe
Yes.
based upon your bereavement groups,
Yes.
what people ask. And one of them that I thought was interesting is, how do I know if I'm grieving or actually depressed?
Yeah, that's a good question. And incidentally, there was an interesting article yesterday in the New York Times about the fact that as I'm going to answer this question in a minute, but I want to cite this article. It's so good. It talked about languishing and how COVID has left people languishing, which is not depression, but it's an expression of grief. So anyway,
wow.
yeah, it's a very good article. Now I forgot your question.
How do I know if I'm grieving or if I'm
depression.
depressed?
So if you're depressed, you are not going to see the light of day. There aren't going to be moments of joy or happiness. It's gray all the time. If you're grieving, the grief, as I said before, it comes in waves. You have moments of breaking through, of having moments of joy and delight, not like you used to, but it's not constant in the same way that depression is. That's the big difference between the two of them.
Can
So then-
grief cause depression though? Have
Well,
you seen that happen?
some people come into grief with a predisposition to depression. I mean,
Okay.
depression is pretty common in this culture, some form of depression, not serious clinical depression, but there's a lot of depression in our culture. So, and I think it depends too on the complexity of the relationship and the loss, your psychological sense of well-being before you had the loss, how the loss happened, because a traumatic loss like a murder or a plane crash or a car crash is far different
Horrific,
than being with someone through a cancer diagnosis.
Right.
You know, so there's a lot of factors that contribute to that.
So that long-term depression, then that would be a good indicator. What are some of the other indicators that maybe I should seek some professional help?
Well, if you're starting to abuse alcohol or opioids, if you're sleeping a lot and not having trouble getting out of bed, if you're having trouble getting to work, not eating, things that are pretty serious, you know, or if you're having thoughts about wanting to be with your loved one who died, you know.
Oh, right.
Suicidal ideations. Although, you know, often you'll hear people say, oh, I just want to be with John. And they're not saying they want to kill themselves. And there's a difference between a suicidal threat and just a yearning to be with the other person. And that's not, I don't want to talk about that in any kind of discerning way on a radio show, because that feels beyond the scope, right?
Can I tell a funny story about that though? I mean,
Yeah.
maybe to make it a little bit light. When my husband's mother passed away, and his mom and dad had been married 50 plus years. And the day of the funeral, we as a family with his siblings and his dad and their spouses, we were driving from the funeral home to the gravesite. And we were in this limousine together. And his dad said something like, oh, this is the worst day of my life. I don't even think I want to live anymore. And we looked over at him as he said that, and he was putting on his seatbelt. And we go, well, Dad, then why are you putting on your seatbelt? You know, it was just, he was
That's right.
It's just
he was
a subtle.
just voicing, he was voicing a
Yeah.
feeling, but he wasn't
It was
taking
despair.
it
It
seriously.
was just,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And so we kind of all started to laugh, and then he started
That's a
to laugh.
great
We kind of-
example.
we
Yeah.
broke that up a little bit.
Oh my goodness, ladies, we only have about 3 minutes left. The time just flew by. Claire, you are such a joy. Did you have fun today?
Yeah, this was great. Yeah, thank you for having me.
I told you, I knew you would. Is there any last parting shot you'd have for our listeners? I mean, go check out your website. Claire's website is, I had it written down here. Claire, tell us your website.
Openingtogrief.com.
openingtogrief.com. Yeah,
Yeah.
go check out
Openingtogrief.com.
Claire, her book. Please buy her book locally. Look for her book locally and request for it and order it.
And review it on Amazon.
And
There you
review it on Amazon. That's very good. Claire, thank you so much for showing up today as you. I think you have a very powerful message, and the time has come. I mean, what you're suggesting are tools to put in our toolkit, and this is what helps bring awareness and healing a lot quicker and understanding. So thank you again for showing up as you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for having me. And just remember, grief is your love. Don't try and wish it away too quickly.
Yeah.
Find a voice and give it full expression.
Yeah.
Thank you, Claire.
I wanted to share this. This came out of our book. We have about a minute left. A heart that is broken opens. A heart that is broken open offers a precious gift, a chance to become more authentic with yourself and with other people. And that is in Claire's book. It just jumped right out at me. And I've got to jump off. That's it. That's all the time we have today. I hope you enjoyed the show. Tell your friends about the show. We have another great show coming up next week. Lastly, please make it a great day, because it is all about choice. And choose to check out Claire's book. Bye-bye for now.
Thank you for tuning in to Life Mastery with Todd Allen, the talk radio show that dives into the science of higher consciousness. Join Todd and his guests weekly at 10 a.m. Pacific Time and learn how to live a peaceful life. For more information on Todd and his guests, visit his website at www.lifemasteryradio.net. That's www.lifemasteryradio.net.
Okay, parachutes ready.
Boy, the things I go through to get auto loan rates as low as 0.99% APR for 60 months on new vehicles with PenFed.
You are aware that you don't have to be a military member to save hundreds on your auto loan, aren't you? Anyone can join PenFed.
As someone terrified of heights, I probably should have looked into that.
Probably.
Drop me off at the shore.
PenFed Credit Union. Visit PenFed.org/autos or call 1-800-247-5626. Advertised rates available through the PenFed car buying service. To receive any advertised product, you must become a member of PenFed, insured by NCUA.
Been thinking about McDonald's all day. Can't get it off my mind. I can already taste it. Ooh, got my mind on my mouth and my mouth ready for some Mickey D's deal.
There's a deal for every moment at McDonald's.
Right now, get 2 of your favorites for just $3.50. Mix and match a classic McChicken, a hot and spicy McChicken, or a juicy McDouble. Price and participation may vary. Cannot be combined with combo meal. Single item at regular price.